Does anyone in the chamber still wish to vote on this amendment? If not, on this vote, the yeas are 58, the nays are 40. Under the previous order requiring 60 votes for the adoption of this amendment, the amendment is not agreed to. Under the previous order, the senator from New Jersey is recognized. May we have some order in the Senate for the senator from New Jersey? May we have order in the Senate? May we have order in the Senate? Senator from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pursuant to the previous order, I ask that my amendment be modified with the changes that are at the desk.
Under the previous order, the amendment is so modified.
Mr. President, this modified amendment, co-sponsored by Senator Bennett, would allow the Patent Office Director to prioritize patents that are important to the national economy or national competitiveness, and the amendment would ensure that patents that are vital to our national interest do not languish.
I have asked the senator to suspend because the Senate is not in order. May we have order in the Senate? May we have order in the Senate, please? Senator from New Jersey.
I thank the chair. Let me say that the amendment will ensure that patents that are vital to our national interest do not languish in any backlog at the Patent Office, and that they ultimately promote the national economy and the national competitiveness. My understanding, Mr. President, is that by previous agreement, the amendment as modified is agreed to.
That is correct. Under the previous order, the amendment as modified is agreed to.
Thank you, Mr. President. With that, I yield the floor and observe an absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Earlier today, the Senate, by a vote of 91 to 9, approved a 2-week extension of federal spending, avoiding a potential partial government shutdown. The extension
President.
Senator from Colorado.
I'd ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection, motions to reconsider on the two previous amendments are laid on the table.
Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. I thank the Senator.
Mr. Akaka.
Where did you get? Senator from Georgia.
Mr. President, are we in a quorum call?
We are.
I would ask unanimous consent the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
And I would like to be recognized as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I come at the end of a long day for all of us to talk about a subject off the subject from the current bill on the floor, but one of tremendous importance to the United States and to the recovery of our economy, and also to just point out for the record and hopefully also for the right people that we're at a critical point in terms of housing in America with Dodd-Frank having been passed and the new rules being promulgated. It's essential that we do not make the mistakes that led us to the last collapse that caused the tragedy in housing in 2007, 8, and 9. As I'm sure the President's aware and the members of the Senate are aware, in the Dodd-Frank bill there was an amendment called the Qualified Residential Mortgage, which was authored by Senator Landrieu, Senator Hagan, and myself, to ensure that the risk retention provisions of Dodd-Frank would not apply to a well-underwritten, well-qualified loan. Risk retention, as the Chair would remember, is the 5% retention requirement of any lender who made a residential mortgage that was not qualified, but they were not specific in their definition of what a qualified mortgage would be. So we took the point to take the historical underwriting standards that have proven so well in this country and write them into the Dodd-Frank bill, which were that a mortgage made to be exempted from a risk retention would have to have 20% down. If there was more than 80% loan to value, that amount above 80% would have to be covered by private mortgage insurance. We required third-party verification of bank deposits, third-party verification of employment, third-party verification of an individual's ability to make the payments and service the debt, and credit reports and all the other underwriting standards. As the Chair will remember, what got us in so much trouble in 2000 to 2007 was we made subprime loans, stated income, didn't do debit checks, didn't do anything else we should have done, and we made a lot of bad mortgages. Anyway, my point is this. There is a committee that's been formed made up of some very distinguished Americans that's promulgating the rules to carry out the intent of Dodd-Frank. That committee includes Sean Donovan from HUD, Ben Bernanke of the Federal Reserve, Edward DeMarco, Acting Director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, John Walsh, the Acting Comptroller of the Currency, Mary Shapiro, the head of the SEC, and the Honorable Sheila Bair, the head of the FDIC. That is a very august group. They are in the process of promulgating the rules to carry out the intent of Dodd-Frank with regard to residential mortgages. And the rumors that are coming out of those negotiations, and I say rumors because I can't verify them because I'm not in, but I do know the articles I've read in the papers the last couple of days send a very troubling signal to me. And just for a few minutes, I want to make the points that I think are so critical. Number one, it's my understanding that they're considering memorializing 80% as the maximum amount of loan to value for a loan that would fall as a qualified residential mortgage and do not address private mortgage insurance for coverage above 80%. Without getting technical, what that would mean is the only qualified residential mortgages that could be made and not require risk retention would have to have a minimum of a 20% down payment. In the olden days of standard lending in the 80s and the 70s and the 60s, when you borrowed more than 80%, but not over 95%, you had private mortgage insurance to insure the top 30% of the loan made so that the investors had the insurance of knowing if there was a default, the top portion of that loan, which was the most in terms of loan to value, would be insured and would be paid. If it is in fact correct that this committee is going to recommend a qualified residential mortgage require a 20% down payment and not make provisions for PMI, we will be making a serious, serious mistake because two things will happen. One, very few people will be able to get a home loan in the entry-level market or even in the move-up market because a 20% down payment is significant. Second, by not utilizing PMI, we would be turning our back on 50 years of history in America where PMI has been used to satisfactorily insure risk and insure qualified lending. We must remember what happened in terms of the collapse of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. What happened was Congress directed that they buy a certain percentage of their portfolio in what were called affordable loans, which became subprime securities, which became 13% of their portfolio, which brought them down when subprime securities collapsed. If we all of a sudden, through fiat, decide to pass regulations to define a qualified residential mortgage that are so prohibitive that we run everybody to FHA, which is exempt, then we'll be putting a burden on FHA that's unsustainable and creating a situation of another collapse or another inability of the United States to meet housing needs through the private sector and through well underwritten loans. So my reason for coming to the floor tonight is hopefully to send a message before the decisions are made to be thoughtful in determining what their parameters will be on a qualified residential mortgage. Yes, I do think an 80% or less loan should be qualified and avoid risk retention. But a well-paid, well-verified, well-credit evaluated individual who borrows more than 80% but less than 75 should be able to do so and be excluded from the risk retention as long as they have private mortgage insurance covering that top 30% of the debt created by that loan. If you do that, you protect the equity provisions, you protect the investor, you make a qualified loan, you don't put the country at risk, but most importantly of all, you don't force everybody to FHA. And that's what we're about to do, because FHA is by definition under Dodd-Frank exempt from risk retention. All other loans are not, except those that will fall under the QRM or the Qualified Residential Mortgage. It would be a disaster for the recovery of American housing to force Americans to only one source of money to finance their home and put so much stress on the Federal Housing Administration and FHA that it collapses under the burden. We need to be pragmatic when we look at the issues facing housing. We need to be practical in terms of taking Dodd-Frank and making it work for the American people. We need to recognize the value of private mortgage insurance, the value of good, solid underwriting, and not put a risk retention in that's so high that we take most American mortgage lenders out of the business, isolated only to a few who dictate and write the parameters they want to write to make housing loans in America. We're at a critical time in our recovery. Housing has hit the bottom, and it has bounced along the bottom, but it is showing some signs of coming back. Now would be the worst time to send a signal that mortgage money is going to be harder and harder to get, the banks are going to have to hold 5% risk retention on even the best of loans, and worst of all, that we give the American people only one alternative for lending, and that's the Federal Housing Administration, which in and of itself already is under such a burden, it's at stress. So, Mr. President, I appreciate the time tonight to bring this message to the floor, that as we write the rules to promulgate the intent of the Dodd-Frank bill in terms of residential housing and finance, we be sure that we do so in such a way that we meet the demands of a vibrant marketplace rather than restricting it, putting a burden on FHA, and protracting what has already been a long and difficult housing recession. And I yield back the balance of my time and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Strong Senator.
The Majority Leader.
I ask consent to call the quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
I now ask unanimous consent that we proceed to a period of morning business. Senators allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations. Counters number 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30. And all nominations placed in the Secretary's desk in the Air Force, Army, Foreign Service, Marine Corps, Navy, and Public Health Service. That the nominations be confirmed en bloc. The motion to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table with no intervening action or debate. No further motion to be in order to any of the nominations. These statements relating to the nomination be printed in the record, and that President Obama be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate proceed, and the Senate then resume legislative session.
Without objection.
I ask consent that the appointment to desk appear separately in the record as if made by the chair.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business day, it adjourn until tomorrow morning, Thursday, March 3rd. Following the prayer and the pledge, journal proceedings be approved to date. Morning hour be deemed expired. The time for the two leaders be reserved for use later in the day. Following any leader remarks, there be a period of morning business till 11 a.m. The senators are permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or the designees, with the Republicans controlling the final half, Republicans controlling the first half, and the majority controlling the final half. Further, at 11 a.m., the Senate resumed consideration of S-23, the American Defense Act. Finally, there will be a period of morning business from 2 to 4, with senators permitted to speak for 10 minutes each, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the next.
Without objection.
Senators should expect roll call votes in relation to amendments to the American Defense Act to occur throughout the day tomorrow. If there is no further business, I ask the Senate stand in adjournment under the previous order. 8:10.
The Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.
So the Senate's gavelled out for the evening, but earlier today, members passed a temporary 2011 spending bill, 91-9. That legislation funds the federal government for the next 2 weeks.